Thank you very much. I understand renewables got a bit of a slating yesterday, so it'll be interesting to see how it goes today. I'm on a little bit later than Build, so I hope you all really topped up your caffeine levels well at the break, because you're going to need them. The real costs and benefits of renewable technologies. When Leo Menil first contacted me many months ago, he's very well organised, and asked me to speak at this event. Of course I agreed, why wouldn't I? Western Building Control, beautiful County Fermanagh, this famous hotel, it was all good. Although at the time, I'm not quite sure if I really understood exactly what it was he wanted me to talk about. So when he contacted me again more recently, and I saw the convention program and saw the title of my presentation, I thought, that's actually quite challenging. And of course, the loaded word there is real, isn't it? We know there are costs in renewables, we know there are benefits, but what are the real costs and what are the real benefits? Fortunately, perhaps, I don't have time to go into it in a lot of detail. And when I started looking into the whole subject, I realized that it's a constantly shifting picture. The real costs and benefits now are not the same as they were when Leo Menil first contacted me, and not the same as they're going to be next year, in 2 years and 5 years. So all I can really do in the time I have is to flag up what I think are the key issues, throw a few figures around, hopefully stimulate some thought, some debate. I see a lot of familiar faces around here from the building control regions in various different parts of the industry, but for those who don't know me, Waterfield Consultants is just me these days. It's a sign of the times. Energy and buildings consultant, so most all of the work that I would do would be working with people commissioning new buildings or with existing buildings, looking at the energy, looking at the carbon. A focus on low carbon buildings, in particular one-off houses. More lately, that's been a growth area for me personally. Not involved with renewable technologies, and I think therefore able to be impartial. Maybe that's why Liam asked me. I was a member of NIBRAC for 2 terms, 6 years altogether, and prior to that for 3 years on an industry advisory panel that was convened to advise on the changes that were forthcoming, particularly to Part F, which Gerald Coulter, who used to write the regs, described as the single biggest change that he had seen in his career in building regulations. And indeed, I chaired the Energy and Ventilation Subcommittee. So I had a real insight into the sort of legislative framework and how that develops. Yes, a shameless plug. I am author of one book, The Energy Efficient Home, A Complete Guide, available from all good booksellers and Amazon. And I'm currently working on a second one, actually, which got a little bit held up because I got slightly distracted building my own low-carbon house. Which actually was also involved in the Open Doors, NZEB Open Doors event that Duncan Martin referred to earlier on. So that's just a little bit of a background so you can see what kind of a person I am. So what I'm going to look at in the time I have left is obviously concerns re carbon emissions. I think those are fairly well understood now. Recent trends in capital cost for renewable technologies. Look at some of the costs of carbon emissions or the value of carbon savings. Just briefly look at carbon savings from renewables just to make sure that they do actually do that, and they do. And then just look at a few case studies, some domestic, some non-domestic, from around about Northern Ireland. Then finishing up with the legislative developments, which I think are really going to be what's important to driving it at the end of the day, and I'll just summarise the presentation. So, make no apologies for this. I'm not quite exactly before your lunch. So anyway, we can see, even in one part of the world, in this case the southern states of America, real weather extremes, serious flooding and also serious drought. You can see that on all the slides I've given credit for where I've taken the material from. So, I think there is finally now, a general consensus that gases such as CO2 are causing climate change all over the world. A lot of statistics bandied about. This one, over 86% of UK CO2 emissions result from production and use of energy. Increased demand for fossil fuels is increasing CO2 emissions. This is from a DEC report, a recent DEC report. Depletion of indigenous supplies and reliance on imports leads to price volatility, certainly, and concerns about security of supply, and that all impacts on business growth. So actually from 2009 to 2010, UK emissions rose by 3.8% against a kind of general downward trend. So we can't be complacent. And of course, there is also the matter of targets, EU targets. We can see the target there for 20% of energy from renewables by 2020, the UK's share of which will be a target of 15%. Okay, so I think it's important, and it has been alluded to already this morning, to observe the energy hierarchy. It is just as wrong, in fact possibly even more wrong, to unnecessarily use renewable energy as it is to use any type of energy, misuse any type of energy. So we need to reduce the need, we need to use energy more efficiently, then we are on the perfect platform to look at renewables where they are appropriate. And of course then to make sure that any remaining fossil fuel use, of which there will be obviously some, is as clean and efficient as possible. So to do that, we establish what our actual energy requirements are. And, as I say, consider which end uses are most suitable for renewables. Not all end uses are going to be suitable in all cases. And our, of course, incentives that we know about, the renewables obligation certificates, feed-in tariffs, although not here in Northern Ireland, and the renewable heat incentive. Okay, so let's look at the falling costs, because that has been a major factor, especially in PV. Plummeting cost of solar modules, I've called it. This is from the Department of Energy in the States. And you can see, since the 1980s, the price, cost per watt in 2012 dollars has really fallen dramatically. And that has been a major factor. Certainly, just in the last couple of years, the kind of prices that you're getting quoted in pounds per watt here are probably about a half, even in some cases a third of what they were 2, 3, 4, up to 5 years ago. So it's a major, major factor. And of course, that's just purely a matter of volume scale-up economics. In fact, interestingly here, we can see PV actually starting to approach the broad cost band for coal and natural gas in the States. And just look at it more recently, average selling prices, again, dropping over a 2-year period, quarter by quarter. Little bits of rises here and there, but generally a consistent downward trend. And of course, what's happening here is that, again, it's competition. It's sort of squeezing the margin, I guess, for the suppliers. And we can see that, whereas back in 2009 here, there's quite a healthy, from the manufacturer's point of view, differential between their costs, what they were selling at, and their manufacturing costs. That has now got squeezed right down, and that's purely competition. It's economies of scale. A little bit of a blip here, not quite sure what it was. Could have been just a temporary kind of a supply and demand factor, but you can see, apart from that, a consistent downward trend. And the same kind of story for wind turbines. Wind turbine prices fallen 29% since 2008. Okay, so that's part of the real costs. The real costs are coming down. Now, of course, grant aiding has been an important factor and will reduce, and is reducing already, with the increased uptake of technologies. I mean, why wouldn't it? And also with reduced capital expenses. Of course, also with legislative and statutory developments. We're not going to get money just to comply with the minimum statutory requirements. As an example, the feed-in tariff in England reduced from a figure of 43.3 pence per kilowatt hour in October 11, now to a figure of about a third of that, 4.9 pence per kilowatt hour in July 13. So the early adopters were really well rewarded, and they're locked into pretty attractive contracts for 20 years. Whereas those people coming in now, it's a lot less attractive. So, although the capex is reducing, grants and incentive will also reduce, and to a greater extent. So again, that is representative of real costs. Okay, well, we'll have a look at some benefits then. Some benefits, these are from the NI Business Info website here. Improving green credentials, certainly. Companies with a focus on corporate social responsibility, maybe strengthening their brand in terms of the environmental credentials, will see a value in this. And building relationships with businesses, organizations with similar values. That's all good. Maybe getting down to something a bit more tangible, more secure energy supply. Yes, certainly if you're generating more of your own energy, then potentially you can make your supply more secure. And also, importantly, stabilize out the costs a bit. Future-proofing, that's a big one. I think we know which way things are going, we just don't know how much and how quickly. And some other potential benefits here: exemption from the climate change levy, reduction in the carbon reduction commitment, EU emissions trading scheme requirements, and also, of course, imports from export tariffs and indeed carbon trading. So those are all possible benefits, some tangible monetary benefits, some other benefits. Okay, this is where you need the caffeine levels. Carbon accounting, and this is a thorny subject. So I'm just going to flag up a few of the terms here around the carbon economy. So SCC, social cost of carbon. What society should be willing to pay now to avoid future damage? So that could be damage from environmental pollution, from actually extraction of energy, the whole thing. So, in 2002, the UK Government Economic Service, via DEC in this case, published these figures. A figure of £19 per tonne of CO2. Now, there was a big range here. You can see a huge range, which again shows the level of uncertainty, how difficult it is to try and nail down figures and sort of work around that kind of level of uncertainty. But between a range of 10 to 38 pounds per tonne of CO2, an average figure there of 19. So they reckoned at a level of 0.27 pounds per tonne CO2 per year, and arriving at 2013, then you'd have a figure of about 22 pounds per tonne of CO2. Again, a huge range still there, 13 to 41 pounds per tonne. Okay, so that's the social cost of carbon. The shadow price of carbon is the figure that tends to be used by most carbon economists, used in modelling and forecasting, which again, of course, itself is a bit of a crystal ball gazing area, and that is based on the SCC. Okay, then you have the MAC, the marginal abatement cost, so the difference between the cost of reducing the emissions and the cost of the damage if they continue. Obviously, some debate to be had around that as well. And then, of course, you have the actual market price. For example, through the EU emissions trading scheme. So, 2008, again, about £20 a tonne of CO2. As a source was Reuters in this case. And they were actually trading on their futures to a 2012 price of 28 pounds per tonne of CO2. Current EU market price, about £5 a tonne of CO2. And that's due, in a lot of cases, to lack of commitment politically and uncertainty about which way legislation is going, that kind of thing. So down significantly on previous figures. Alternatively, when you have something like the energy commitment obligation on the on this UK energy companies, in some cases, they are prepared to pay up to £120 per tonne of CO2 in order to meet their obligations. So various different factors start affecting the economics. Okay, it gets a bit easier from now on, I think. Just to underline the level of uncertainty, and again, the source here is DEC in this year. Here is the range of uncertainties. High level, medium level, which doesn't look very medium, it looks closer to the low level. But you can see a huge, huge variation there. So what are the key uncertainties? Well, certainly the quantity of access to international offsets available in the system, uncertainty about that, and again, the extent to which the abatement will be brought on by wider EU policies, uncertainty about the political regime. So, which figures should be used for future carbon reductions from renewables? I don't have an answer for that. I said a very briefly look at the issue of carbon savings from renewables, because there is speculation from time to time that the renewable technologies actually don't save any carbon over their lifetime. I don't think that's right. I think there's some kind of basic law of economics which would suggest that even if a manufacturer is paying less for their energy than you are paying, there's some correlation, and again, sort of different energy types, so there's some correlation between energy and carbon. If these things save energy, which they obviously do, I think they must also save carbon. And the EST has certainly confirmed this in the case of PV. They would estimate about a ton of CO2 per year from a typical home installation, so about maybe 30 tons, in excess of 30 tons of CO2 over its lifetime. Here you can see, looking at wind, here onshore and offshore wind, figures, carbon emissions per kilowatt hour, wind 9, onshore 6 grams offshore, and then compared then with gas and coal and a combined cycle gas turbine. So, very low compared to other forms of energy. Okay, so I'm just going to take a little bit of a tour around some renewable energy installations here locally, and I have various organisations to credit, and you can see, in this case, this is the Carbon Trust. So Strabane Mill is not too far away from here. A 1.65 megawatt biomass boiler supplied by Wood Energy Limited. So previous oil usage for this organisation, 600,000 litres a year at a total cost of about 200,000. So the cost of the wood chip per year now, 60,000 a year. So with oil savings of about 400,000 litres per year. So you can see overall a substantial reduction in their running costs. Carbon savings, 283 tonnes a year. So if we take our £20 per tonne of carbon figure, then you can see how that would impact. And if you were to then offset that against the capital cost, you could maybe sort of, which actually we don't have here, you could actually sort of factor that in at the initial stage. One of the other benefits in this case has been it's encouraged local farmers to take up short rotation coppicing, and of course the farmers are then selling fuel to the mill where they also buy their feed. So it's really kind of a nice virtuous circle in terms of the local economy. Here we have the Strangford Lough Wildfowlers and Conservation Association, 50 kilowatt hydropower plant. This was from NHT, formerly New Mills Hydro. So CapEx here, £250,000, but 95% grant aided. I mean, that maybe gives you an idea of the level of that economics have been running at. Annual return, yes, it is quite dependent on rainfall. So carbon savings of 52 tonnes a year, again, multiply that up by the £20 a tonne over the lifetime, and you can start getting, again, some idea of how that might impact on the overall economics. Here we have a large-scale wind turbine, and this is in Garva, farmer John McClanahan. So 225 kilowatt turbine, quite a good size of the thing. Total capex, we have that now, 120,000. So again, we can see 97 tonnes CO2 saved. Multiplying that up again, we can see how that would impact on the capital cost. In the case of sort of various different future scenarios in terms of the value of carbon saved. Just looking at a sort of smaller scale, a couple of domestic schemes now, domestic solar water heating. We have an evacuated tube system here from Thermomax. Again, full capex and grant aiding. Grant aiding is important there. Cost savings, well, you have assumptions about what type of energy you're displacing. Simple payback period with the grant, 11.5, and there's the carbon savings there. And finally, we have a little domestic PV, or little, it's a good size, I guess, 1.9 kilowatt peak system, about 10 square meters of panel you can see here, supplied by Horizon Renewables. And again, you can see the kind of figures here. You've got the handout from these slides in your packs. You can look at the figures yourselves. How am I doing for time? Not too bad. But I think we know the writing's on the wall, because it doesn't finish there, does it? The whole thing is going to be really determined by legislation. The recast of the European Energy Performance and Buildings Directive. Article 9 refers to NZEBs, nearly zero energy buildings, and Duncan Martin referred to that earlier on. My own house was also, I think I said, involved in that programme. So, all new buildings in the EU member states to be NZEB by end of 2020, new public buildings by end of 2018, dwellings likewise, interim targets to be set in order to make sure that the member states can actually achieve that level of performance at that time. Targets a refurbishment of existing buildings to NZEB, and that's much more challenging. So it's left to some extent up to the individual member states to decide what the definition of an NZEB should be. In the Republic of Ireland, at the moment, the best guess is it's going to be about 45 kilowatt hours per square metre per year, which is at the level of an A2 rated building. That's exactly where my house is, so it's bang on the money for an NZEB in 5 years' time. There's a lot of buildings getting built to even the current building regulations in the Republic, or not getting built to the regulations in many cases, that are going to look pretty bad in 4 or 5 years' time. And of course, then we have the current commitment in England for zero carbon homes from 2016 and non-domestic buildings by 2019. Of course, as we know, the UK government then did drop plans to implement the new Part L this year. There was some doubt then about on the UK targets, but lately, at a very last minute, the government does seem to have confirmed that they will be moving ahead on that. And of course, just to underline the point that you understand already, that an NZEB, a nearly zero energy building, is not the same thing as a zero carbon building. And it's interesting that having learnt to talk in carbon terms, the European directive now seems to be going back to energy, and that reinforces the importance of the energy hierarchy. It's as wrong, as I say, to unnecessarily use renewable energy as it is any other form of energy. Okay, so just in summary, the real costs and benefits of renewable technologies, real costs are changing. They're falling. CapEx is falling, but also grant and aid and incentives are also, not surprisingly, reducing. Other real benefits remain: green credentials, corporate social responsibilities, we know, branding, security of supply, we looked at, and avoidance of cost volatility. A lot of uncertainty on the future value of carbon emissions saved. And of course, the issue underlined only too well just recently about reduced damage and loss due to extreme weather events. Legislative and statutory requirements will increase through the European directive, delivered in many cases through the building regulations. So basically, it's all down to you guys. Thank you for your time.